Hey everyone, I'm Norm. Welcome to Breaking Back, a tennis podcast by fans, for fans, covering all aspects of the game with an unfiltered lens. And I'm here with my co-hosts, Peter and Chris. Welcome to Breaking Back.
Welcome to Breaking Back, presented by Portland, Maine's Lone Pine Brewing Company and their new Winter Carnival beer, which was just released in mid-November. Winter Carnival is a 5.2% ABV seasonal winter white ale brewed with the colder months in mind. Winter Carnival has a custom spice blend with notes of clove, coriander, ginger, and orange peel. Thank you, Lone Pine.
I think we're going to need a few Winter Carnivals, Peter, for this conversation today. We're going to be exercising a lot of...
I don't think you want to have too many Winter Carnivals. This is you need to be sharp.
Indeed.
It's low ABV.
Yeah.
Well, mid-tier.
Well, guys...
Good beer nonetheless. Thank you, Lone Pine.
Merry Christmas and soon to be...
Happy holidays.
Happy Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and all the above. Yeah.
Festivus.
We're right in the middle of it.
Sure are.
You guys ready? Got your gifts and stuff?
I haven't started.
I took care of one side of things. I haven't done like the core family yet.
I think the hardest thing is the stockings. I leave that to the last minute, and then I'm screwed. And
I honestly let my
drugstore
wife handle most of it.
But what about your wife's stocking? That's a big deal. No?
She actually stuffs her own stocking.
That's probably the way to do it.
The tchotchkes, we have all the tchotchkes ready. It's the big gift, the major gift we have to dial in.
Yeah. I've decided, this will air long after Christmas, so I've decided concerts and events are the best gifts because they're, you can do it pretty instantaneously.
I like it.
Oh, that's a great idea.
But I think we'd be remiss, guys, if we didn't at least do a toast or something to the Vermont Catamount Division I soccer team national champions. So here to Max Murray and the boys.
Unbelievable. To be unseeded and just blow through, 2 seed, Pittsburgh.
I saw that on TV, and I had to check 3 or 4 sources online.
Yeah. Six skiing national championships, but no Vermont, no America East at all.
Well, isn't it usually? I mean, I know Davidson in Florida has a stellar soccer program. UCLA, USC,
Indiana, Ohio
Virginia,
State,
University of Texas, I know has a really solid program.
Yeah, but there's programs like Marshall who won it a few years ago that are up and coming. Akron, believe it or not, Akron I think have the supposed best player, the Max Herman Award. I think it is. Guy scored like 31 goals, something like that at Akron.
Wow.
There's a lot of talent. It is quality soccer. I watched a lot of it too, and it's really quality soccer.
Yeah, but it meant so much to Vermont, and it was so cool to see that Burlington lit up by the Catamounts. But at any rate, gents, here we are, episode 9, wrapping up the year. Pretty exciting, and
what a year it's been.
It has been, and we'll get to that at the end of our conversation here. But why don't we introduce our guest today, Natalie Cutter. Natalie grew up outside Boston and has played tennis from the age of 4, attending a Greensboro, North Carolina sports camp where she played and went on to coach. Her childhood is filled with memories of watching tennis and cheering for Roger Federer, along with making Sunday NFL game picks every week and going to Red Sox and Patriots games. Sports has clearly been an integral part of her life. Natalie graduated from Wake Forest, go DEACS, in 2023 with a double major in economics and psychology, receiving high honors distinction for her thesis work on how efficiently betting markets reacted to the implementation of the serve clock for tennis, which is what we're going to discuss in our conversation today. Natalie continued her research from undergrad after college and went on to present at the Eastern Economics Association, representing the North American Association of Sports Economics. Her work is currently under review with the Journal of Sports Betting. Welcome to the podcast, Natalie.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here, and that was quite an intro, hard to follow.
Well, it's pretty amazing. I'll just say it before we jump in, like reading your research was pretty daunting and quite a impressive display of theory and whatnot. So very anxious to talk about it, but wow, quite accomplished for someone at your young age.
Yeah, I would say it's probably the most proud thing that I've done at this point in my career. And every time I go back and read it, it just reminds me of the direction that I want to continue to go in. It brings me so much passion and joy to read that piece of work.
Natalie, it's Chris. I'm gonna start.
Hi, Chris.
Hey, how you doing? So I'm gonna start off with the first question, which is in two parts. But the first is, what inspired you to write about this specific topic, which is essentially, the title of the paper is "The Tennis Surf Clock Started Ticking and the Betting Market Inefficiencies Followed." So I'm just my initial response when I read through we did both the summary and read in depth the entire report, and from that, the only thing I could really gather initially is, what inspired you to go after this topic? And then second, what were your highlights from any of the matches you saw this year?
Wow, that's a tough top. That's two. Yeah, go ahead, Natalie.
Good two-part question. I'm probably going to have to cut down how much I can say here. But so I'll start with, as an economics major, I was taking sports economics in the fall of my senior year, and it was just by far the most stimulating, interesting class I had taken. I really felt like I found my passion between sports, which has been a part of my life forever, and economics, which is where I really academically thrived all of college. So in that class, we were learning about tournament theory, competitive balance, the uncertainty of outcome hypotheses, the principal agent dilemma, all of these economic terms that we coined to explain how leagues and sports function. And so for that class, we had the joy of writing a term paper. And this is called a term paper because you are supposed to do it for 4 months. And so other kids in the class, the hysteria over a whole term paper is a lot. But for me, I was actually really excited. So I got the opportunity to write mine about the iconic 2008 Federer Nadal Wimbledon finals.
Wow.
And that work of art led me into this work of art. So that was kind of how I got inspired there.
That's amazing. And I like how you refer to the match as a work of art. That's really cool. So highlights from the year.
From this year? I think I'm going to have to go with the Sunshine Double. So for those who aren't familiar, who will be listening to this podcast, we refer to the Miami Open and Indian Wells as the Sunshine Double because they're these hot, grueling tournaments in California and Miami where we really don't see players who are, best in the league at the time being able to capitalize on both. And so looking at the spreads for those when Sinner and Alcaraz played those two matches, they were essentially 50-50, but the markets got both of those matches wrong. And I think that was just a really fun time in tennis because it was towards the beginning of the season and we really didn't know the potential of Sinner and didn't know if Alcaraz was going to hold on to his iconic 2023 Wimbledon reign. So that was one of my favorites, I would say.
Just a quick question on back to your inspiration. Like, what was the actual paper that you wrote relative to the 2018 match, and how did that inform, this project?
Yeah. So essentially, I looked at how economic theory played into the way that match went out. So things that I talked about was how leagues set up tournaments, specifically how the ETP sets up the draw to ensure that the championship product is that championship product that fans are striving for. So how are we ensuring that Federer and Nadal are playing in the championship where we have maximal prize money at stake and gate receipts are more than they are in the first round. So looking at how the league kind of is able to produce that championship product. And then also looking into, strategies in terms of, they're two of the most different players historically. So with Nadal being a lefty and Federer being a righty, how they took different serving strategies to, one up each other in that match. So that was kind of where my inspiration came from. And really on the serve side, I knew about this rule change that was occurring and kind of went further down that direction.
Natalie, hey, this is Peter, and I'm fairly proficient in sports betting, other than in baseball, soccer, and tennis. Can you explain tennis betting for us? What overall money lines, the spreads, live betting, prop bets, parlays, that sort of thing to us?
Yeah, for sure. So what we focused on was pre-game odds. So we looked at the spreads in terms of the favorite has minus 150 points. So you would place a bet for $1 to win 150 back. And then we have the underdog, which is going to be known as a long shot. And that's where you're able to capitalize more on those types of bets. So some of the things that I looked at was kind of how these biases played out in a sport like horse racing, where there's very little difference in skill among all the different horses, or, for example, betting on the exact game of an NFL game versus in tennis, you have two outcomes, player A or player B. So we see people tend to favor the favorite more so in a match where there's two outcomes versus bets where you have a multitude of options to choose from. We see long shot bias come up more.
So are like prop bets huge in tennis? Like the over-under is 10.5 aces for Tiafoe, or I'll say Alcaraz over Tiafoe. Is that a big bet? Are there a lot of prop bets as common in tennis as they are like in basketball?
I honestly don't know on that as much, but I would just say like we focused on all of the overall odds in terms of the head-to-head. So we didn't look at any like live betting. We didn't look at prop betting. We just looked at what the Vegas lines were producing right before the match started. And then what we used in our actual analysis was the last reported live odds heading into a match. I think in tennis specifically too, like the pool of bettors is more niche and smaller than it is in other sports like football and basketball, where there's a more established network of betting that's happening in those sports.
You reference in the paper, or maybe I guess just in the follow-up email exchange, that you're talking to sports betting organizations. How do you market this to a sports book or somebody so they can use it to their advantage and enhance their odds on increase the revenue of their take, right? Like that's what they're looking to do, and they must be looking for data like this, or to give them that edge.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I've kind of gone back and forth in my head about this. Is this something to market to sports books to say, hey, I have this competitive advantage, like let me sell you the models that I've created? But kind of going back to the core of the paper, we were looking at the efficient markets hypothesis, which posits that prices are accurately reflecting all readily available information in that time period. And so what our research actually found is in the period following the implementation of the serve clock, there was a period of inefficiency where there was more money available to bettors after the serve clock. However, the efficient markets hypothesis still played out, and we saw that those returns came stabilized as to where they were before. So I would say, my work didn't necessarily tell the world a secret that they didn't already know. It more just emphasize that this idea of efficient market hypotheses that we talk about every day in finance that similarly applies in wagering markets, and this contributes to that like phenomenon that's standing that efficient market hypotheses play out in these markets.
Right. So the idea that a change in the rules or in a sport can open up a window. I think that's what I take from this paper. And as someone who, like, I like to live bet tennis because I feel like I know when there's a momentum change and I can see it before it's reflected in the spread. That's kind of my angle on this. But I think, the rule change thing and how you proved that there was an exploitation of that is fascinating. And I know, Peter, you had thought about this in context of other sports.
Yeah, I'm just fascinated at how things change within a match. To your point, someone's down in men's tennis, someone's down 2 sets to love, or love to 2 sets, and the odds change tremendously, do they not? And so that's where a lot of the action, quote unquote, happens, is when the odds are in your favor, right, or not in your favor, I should say, and you want to bet $1 in order to make $10.
Yeah, well, the example I like to point at, because I made out in this case, was the Sabalenka golf final last year. And when Sabalenka won the first set, I could just tell Coco was kind of getting over, some nerves and, stage fright a little bit, and that she was starting to play better. And at that point, I think the odds were pretty even. I think, maybe Sabalenka was favored to start. But at that point, at the end of the first set, it went to plus like 350 for Coco, and I put a lot of money on that at that point, and it paid off. But that's just feel like that's not that's not using any of the.
But is there a serve clock
data
in both men's and women's?
Oh yeah,
There is.
yeah.
Okay.
But I thought about your hypothesis around the physicality, Natalie, and that aspect and age, but then also how really it's endurance, right? And over the course of a match, that you can extend a match. Like if I'm playing a match in my old man tennis, I'm going to bounce the ball 20 times between every serve and towel off, right? Tie my shoe, anything I can do to gain an advantage and catch my breath. But when you're taking that away from a Rafa or a Federer or an older player, like you are putting them at a disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen this a lot in sports where the leagues are constantly trying to reintroduce offensive excitement back into the game, keep the pace moving along. But I would say, things like this is really evident today where we're seeing this next generation of younger players dominating when we didn't expect to see that happen so quickly. I was doing some reading the other day, and one of the things they were talking about with Andy Murray being Djokovic's new coach is how tactically brilliant he is, and if he's going to be able to kind of pick apart these younger players and help Djokovic get to that place of you can't just cruise through a 5-set Grand Slam match with the introduction of the serve clock. He doesn't have the stamina that these younger players have. So tactically and strategically, is he going to be able to overcome, the lack of physicality on his side?
I was just thinking about going back to the serve clock, and then we can wrap up the serve clock discussion if we want to. But for what purpose was that put in place? Because on one hand, for tournaments that rely on TV ad dollars, it's much more attractive to not have a serve clock and let the games go as long as they might go, because you're just going to get more ad dollars out of that and licensing fees and so on and so forth. So were the matches really becoming obnoxiously long that they needed to put that in place, or is it done to create a level of a more equal play?
Yeah, great question. I would say more the latter. I think there's, in the sense of leagues are always trying to speed up the pace of play to introduce fan engagement. And, while we all love to watch baseball games that are 5 hours long or sit on our couch and watch football all day, at times that gets exhausting. But I think more to your point about the latter, and this is kind of what we talked about in our sports economics class, is the leagues are designed to produce uncertainty of outcome and to ensure that players are producing maximal effort. And, there has to be that competitive balance. We can't have players having advantage over one another. So where the league was completely dominated by the big three, we weren't even allowing up and coming players to shine in these matches. I think a cool stat is from the data set that I looked at, 88% of the matches where one of the big three played were won by one of the big three. So I think that just kind of put into perspective for me that there was a need for the league to ensure that whether it was a Grand Slam or an ATP 250 event, they were providing, a field where both players could excel.
Hey, Natalie, in addition to the serve clock, what tennis rule changes do you feel need to be made in order to enhance the sport and increase fan viewership moving forward? Like, there's rumors of the men playing best of 3 sets like they do in the Olympics. The tiebreak rules seem to change so as to avoid the John Isner, 14-hour match that took 3 days to play. What rule changes would you lean into?
Yeah, I would probably say, I think increasing fan viewership outside of Grand Slams has always fascinated me. Unless you're like a tennis fanatic like us, we're really only streaming and broadcasting the Grand Slams across ESPN and all these channels. And I remember for the French Open, we couldn't even get it because we didn't have cable. And I finally had to subscribe to Tennis Channel to be able to watch, these off tournaments. But I think there's a very large piece of revenue that's sitting on the table that is just not tapped into because we're not offering tennis broadly to, the fans that just watch for Grand Slams and aren't fanatics like the four of us probably are.
Yeah, I think one thing actually we've talked about a lot in our 9 episodes, almost every one that comes up. How do we fix tennis, right? The idea that it's just each of the 4 slams are different companies competing with each other, right? Not for the betterment of the game. And all these little tournaments are fighting for their lives, getting cannibalized, year after year. And, our last guest suggested there needed to be some sort of centralized commissioner to really own and drive, continuity and alignment. But how hard is
that? My idea.
Oh, your idea. I'm sorry.
Stephanie said was not
she
ever going to happen.
Well, yeah. But I think which is
just an accurate statement. It will never happen.
But money could make it happen, right? I think if there's to Natalie's point, I agree. There's a lot of missed opportunity in the way they're delivering this content because it's hard to find where the tournaments are, how to watch them, who's playing where, right? We've talked about that a lot, but
that's what this podcast is for.
Well, I think this idea of an alternative cast or an alt cast, like we're seeing pop up, Monday Night Football is using it with the Mannings, and I think soccer's doing it. Right?
Kelsey Brothers with football.
Yeah, it creates a much more engaging, dynamic environment for people to rally around a sport, whether in real time with their friends across the planet. And you don't have licensing issues because you're not broadcasting. Like the broadcast is going on, you're reacting to it. But have you experienced any of those alt casts in other sports, Natalie? And do you think that might work in tennis?
Could you rephrase the question? I'm not totally following.
So do you ever watch like on Monday Night Football when you see there's the main broadcast, and then they'll have the alternative or alt cast where it's Peyton Manning and his brother, right? Kind of like watching the game,
Eli.
and then they'll have like, I don't know, some other guest on from like music or politics.
Like Nick Kyrgios doing Wimbledon.
He'd be
or
money.
Australian.
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
Right.
Exactly what I'm thinking here. I'm going to miss him. He's going to be on the court in the next one.
He's the best.
Right, I know. He's been great, don't you think?
Yeah, he was phenomenal. I think he actually really added. That was one of the most enjoyable Australian Opens, and he really has a knack for that. So, and they were talking about how Andy Murray is just so obsessed with tennis, and if we didn't see him coaching, we were going to see him broadcasting. And so I think, there is a way in that sense to kind of play into whether it's some of the retired players or broadcasters that are more well known for there to be crossover. I think that's definitely a very interesting idea in terms of getting tennis on more people's radars more regularly. I think another thing that was great that they did is when they aired the Alcaraz-Nadal match live on Netflix. We're seeing Netflix do a lot more live airings of sporting events, and that's been extremely successful for fan viewership. So I think doing spontaneous things like that for tennis would open a new set of doors for fans to stay engaged more than 4 times a year in watching tennis.
And Netflix has put a lot of time and energy into tennis with Breakpoint and Challengers, and we had a visual effects supervisor that worked on Challengers a few episodes back. Absolutely fascinating conversation. And did you like the film, by the way?
I thought it was very well done. I'm going to use the saying again, but I thought it was a piece of art. And I did listen to that podcast, and just the way that they were showing the shots of the two guys in the last scene, like back and forth. It was very captivating. Like, I clearly remember it.
And isn't it crazy that they didn't know how to play tennis?
You wouldn't know from watching the film, would you?
Right. Yeah. No, they pulled it off pretty well. I mean, do you amongst your friend group, or people that that may not be as obsessed with tennis, like, did they watch the movie? Did they enjoy it? I'm always curious about someone's take on that film.
Yeah. I mean, I know a couple people that watched it that aren't big into tennis. And I think it actually did appeal to a larger crowd. I think one thing I really appreciated, and those same friends said about it, is it did a great job showing like what it takes to have hard work and to be really good at something, and the sacrifices that you have to make it in certain industries. And tennis is definitely one of those industries where they did a great job, exploiting how it's not all glitz and glamour for those that aren't in the top 100, and the pay isn't there for those that aren't constantly winning tournaments. So I thought that was they did a great job of bringing in an audience that could relate to that kind of story.
Well, I have a suggestion for you, Natalie. I think you need to have like a TikTok account, an X account, and you need to come up with, some ways for tennis bettors to take advantage of opportunities like the one you discovered via this incredible piece of work you've done. Because I follow this stuff on Twitter, and you see these guys every day. They're like giving you their recommendations on this bet or that bet and why. And I think
we could actually create Natalie's picks in the podcast.
That's right.
And every week you could report in. Yeah, as the season starts this January.
Right, that'd be a good idea. Do you bet? I mean, do you bet yourself, Natalie, on games or matches?
I don't bet myself. I think it's a little bit of a risk-averse thing, and a little bit of it's a daunting world to enter. But I ask myself, if I could fabricate the ideal betting scenario, not actually fabricate because it was real research, but if I could do that, I could probably get some real dollars in my back pocket from...
We'll go for a DraftKings sponsorship.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, what's the ideal platform to gamble on tennis? Is it DraftKings?
DraftKings has, they all do. And you can, what's crazy is you can bet so many different ways, like point by point, like how's this game going to end of the set.
Those are the prop bets I was referring
to. There's a lot of prop bets. Yeah,
there's a place at Encore near, in the North Shore, or in Everett, not too far from where I live, that they have one of those giant rooms.
Yeah, sportsbook
rooms where you can, I think,
it's insane.
Bet on whatever you want.
That's where sports gamblers lose their, during the NCAA tournament, when you have. Basketball games from 12 noon to 12 midnight, 4 games at a time, and they're betting on who's going to make the next three-pointer or the over-unders.
But I think
nuts.
From a tennis standpoint, I think you could have an alt cast. You have like ESPN or whoever's going to carry the broadcast because it's expensive and they do all that production. And then you have an alt cast where guys like us or Natalie are in a room or just, via Zoom talking about the match with some overlay of data and statistics on the screen. I think that's where you could get a partnership with the DraftKings, and you could be huge lead generation for them to filter and just drive fans to engage on their platform.
It's going to be a big trend moving forward.
Yeah.
They're doing it in the NBA right now with the comedian. I forget whose name's supposed to be. Who's the short comedian? African-American guy was in Jumanji.
Oh,
I'm missing the top. Kevin Hart. Yeah, Kevin Hart does it. Who's highly entertaining for NBA games.
Yeah, I like your idea, Chris. I think if we have to figure out a way to, monetize this and compensate Natalie for her time. But I
Absolutely.
think that'd be cool.
Well, Natalie, what do you have? Do you have any predictions for 2025?
I have thoughts. I think we're going to see, a similar game to what we saw in 2024 with some Sinner, Alcaraz, and Djokovic, fighting for those top spots. I think it'll be interesting to see how Djokovic plays out not coming in the top three. So he is going to have a much harder time getting that 25th Grand Slam if he's meeting those players at earlier rounds of tournaments. I also think we might see Zverev get his first Grand Slam. He was so close, and he's really peaking. So that would be,
How about
that would be awesome.
What about on the women's side?
Yeah, on the
What's Naomi Osaka going to do, or Caroline Wozniacki, or Paolini?
I think it's Emma Navarro's year.
Yeah,
I was asking Natalie.
I would agree with that. I think it's,
Chris, tell us, what do you think?
I think we're going to see some great things from Emma, and I can't remember that. What was that 16-year-old girl's name? She was
The Russian girl.
blonde.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, she
shoot.
could make it into the top 10.
Yeah, that good call. She has incredible stroke. She kind of reminds me of, I don't know, I can't think of his name, but her strokes are just textbook, and she's so mentally tough. Like, she wants to kill her opponent. She's
a winner.
She is a winner. Yeah.
What about the Chinese player? I can't
Oh,
pronounce her name.
She had a phenomenal year.
Oh, she sure did.
Shen
God,
Lin, is that how you say it?
starting
Yeah,
at the Australian Open.
Right. Yeah.
That's
So
where I learned about her.
I'd expect her to do well there. I think you're right, Nat. I think we're going to see the women's game is almost was more interesting last year than the men's game.
Well,
I agree.
Yeah.
By the points, Swiatek is at 82.95 and Sabalenka is at 94.16. So it's
What
very
does that
tight.
mean?
For the Australian.
Well, no, that's just their total points in the WTA.
Points.
Yeah. Whereas, like in the ATP, Center's at 11.8, and the next person down from him is like at 9, I think. Yeah. No, 79.
Okay.
I mean, it's huge.
You're coming in with the data today.
Yeah.
Josh. Good
Well,
work.
it's a data call.
So, Natalie, do you get to any tournaments yourself, or are there any on a year-to-year basis that you target?
Yeah, so I've been going to the U.S. Open for the past couple of years. I got to see the Tommy Paul Wawrinka match, and it was pretty good. Haven't seen any of our favorites, but I'm hoping to get to Wimbledon in the coming years. I think that's always been a dream of mine. So,
But to see Wawrinka's backhand live, I mean,
yeah.
you just watch that over and over
It's
and
amazing.
over again.
It really is the most beautiful thing ever
And-
created.
I mean, that match again was Tommy Paul's one of the fittest players
yeah.
in the league. And so I was watching my paper come to life right there, seeing the serve clock and just seeing Wawrinka bring his slow body back to the baseline. And Tommy Paul he looks unscathed, no sweat on him. So that was a fun one to see. And then I'll actually be at the Miami Open in 2024 as well. So.
And I believe you have a sister that works for the Miami Dolphins down there, so that'll work
Yeah.
out well.
Yes, yeah, I've gotten to go to some cool events because of that. So,
What other sports, since you have a sister that works in the NFL, what other sports do you embrace in addition to tennis?
basketball. I'm a huge Celtics fan, so I'm going to
Let's go.
Celtics
All
games
right.
constantly. And then those are the main three. We're really talking tennis, football, and basketball. And my appetite for the long baseball games is unfortunately it's not satiated anymore.
It's understandable.
What actually, have you thought at all about the impact? Like, think about basketball, right? And the way the Celtics play with this just torrid pace of 3-pointers, and how everybody, the impact on the league is they're dropping in ratings by leaps and bounds. But the Celtics have optimized their team for the current rules. But I wonder if you could make some sort of application of this logic used for tennis to the rule changes, or let's say, for example, they bring back hand checking in basketball. That would immediately be a massive impact on betting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I definitely think that what the models we built here are transferable to other leagues. I mean, we didn't do anything too crazy here. We just basically created a profile of how have they performed in the prior 5 matches coming into their current match. What are the stakes at hand, monetary wise, in terms of prize money, and like what kind of tournament is it? And then we just quantified their probability of winning the match based on our models and then compared that to what Vegas said. So I definitely think it's transferable and would love to start doing this more regularly and maybe being, an inside tipper on some of these lines.
Very cool. Well, I stand by my suggestion. I think you've got a brand here, Natalie, that you can stand up and monetize. And we'll put our heads together and figure out if we, as we mature our podcast, if we get a gambling segment in, we'll have to get, we'll call it something after you, and we'll get you front and center. So thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing this with us. It was fascinating to read, and I can't wait to think about, it's going to make me approach betting in a whole different way. Like, so I don't know. It's great stuff.
How do you approach betting today?
I don't do any research. I wait until the game or the match starts, and then I watch and I react to real-time events, because I just think, you can say a football game, you look at the weather, you look at the injury report, you look at the trends, like who needs this game more than the other guy. And all that goes out the window when the game starts. And I think the same is true in tennis, right? Like somebody can come in with a, kind of banged up, but, their opponent slips, right? Like the dynamics change, and you can see momentum because it's such a, an emotional and mental sport. And when you can see people start to kind of swing from, a winning position to possibly, losing one, that's when you make your move. But it takes a lot of time. You have to sit there and really watch it, and it's more of a momentum play than anything else. But that's how I like to do it, because it's also part of the match. So I like to do it while I'm watching, as opposed to just like betting on a bunch of games and only watching, a couple.
Right. Yeah. No, tennis is very fascinating like that, where there's just so many factors that can come into play. How they show up physically today? What's their momentum from set 1 to set 2 looking like? Is it a physical game? Is it a psychological game? And I think that's what makes betting specifically in tennis so exciting versus these other sports we're talking about. In the end of the day, those are team sports, but when we're looking at tennis, are really all the pressures on one individual. So how they cope with that, I think that's something that is interesting to see how that plays out in future betting lines, because how do you capture that in a price? It's hard to say.
Yeah, right. Like if somebody has a complete meltdown after a bad call, that's going to completely impact how the match goes, at least for the next few games. So there's some opportunities that are created there. Anyhow, well, again, thank you so much, Natalie, for coming on our little podcast, and we will certainly follow up throughout next season for some engagement. And in the meantime, have a wonderful holiday season.
Happy holidays.
You too. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Natalie.
I love what you're doing here.
Wow.
Yeah, so I actually didn't know that I was, preparing for the episode, and I wrote down, I just typed in rankings for men and women, and it pops out ATP, WTA, and Sinner has 11,830 points, and Zverev is at 7,915. And he's in second place. I mean,
is he number 2 now?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
And Sabalenka is at 9,416 points. And Swiatek's at 8,295. So the women are just neck and neck.
But she's going to, be suspended likely, right? Based on this drug test.
Who's
result.
Sabalenka?
Yeah. No, Swiatek.
Oh.
The two, the two of the top players in the game are essentially, between her and a Sinner, could be kicked out for a year or two, which is just absurd.
That's kind of awesome.
Which is a great segue into, our kind of year-end wrap-up, right? I think we all put some thought into some bests and worsts. And Peter, do you want to start us off with your
Well, yeah, I would say the
breakdown?
first thing would be tournament based. What was the best tournament? And since you were at the Wimbledon,
I was at the Wimbledon.
I thought Wimbledon sort of could be the best and worst. The best in the sense that there was a record 37 5-set matches in the tournament, and it rained, I think, every day at Wimbledon. So I don't know if that had an effect on the 5-set matches or not, but I think Ben Shelton had to play 4 5-setters in a 6 or 7 day period because of all the rain. But I'm a big fan of Wimbledon, and you were there, so I sort of feel like Chris and I were in your hip pocket there.
Absolutely.
As you were in the queue at 4 a.m. or whatever it was,
Waiting.
and sending us pictures at Wimbledon. And then, yeah, there was a lot to talk about this year. I would say the next thing I would ask you two about, what was your favorite news or story? For me, I thought for some reason it was the returns of the Naomi Osakas of the world and Caroline Wozniacki, who I'm a fan of. I enjoyed watching Paolini play, and then there were some other stories that I wouldn't call necessarily worst, but Rafa's retiring is, I think, at the top of the list of storylines from this past year. Zverev's issues, Sinner's doping, and Joker's quote-unquote procedure, I think, were amongst some other storylines.
Are we concerned about Rublev's mental health in general?
I know you are.
It's on my list.
Is that a best or a worst for you?
It's neither. It's a concern.
It's still going to be a worst. He is going to snap.
He's ranked 8th in the world, though. I mean, he's right in there.
He's a great guy. I mean, how can you not love Zverev?
Because he's going to kill himself.
Well, I'll really upset you here, Chris, with my best, and that is Djokovic's Wimbledon run on one knee, gets to the final, and the Olympic gold accomplishment. That match to me was match of the year, and the way he finished it was just incredible. And hats off to the Serbian for getting his golden slam finally. The best team or country, by far was the Italians. Sinner obviously finishing number 1, having won 2 slams. Paolini just had a magical run and so fun to watch, like a little sprite running around. And Musetti's run at Wimbledon, and then throughout the summer he had a great year. So the Italians are a force and will be for a period of time. Let's see.
Fashion?
Yeah.
Best,
Chris,
worst fashion?
What do you got for outfit?
Well, I mean, I'd like to start off by saying that as a rule, I think that any male player that wears a sleeveless shirt is immediately
it's in, though.
It's a no-go. I understand the functionality and fashion over function or function over fashion, whatever. But I don't need to see your hairy armpits.
Well, and to your point, right? Zverev's wrestling suit that he wore at the U.S. Open.
No bueno.
Yeah,
it's like Vision Quest out there. I mean,
I'm a crusty old guy that likes it simple and plain Jane white. So, unfortunately, that's why Wimbledon to me is the best event. I loved Kyrgios in the alternative cast and how they brought him in for the Australian Open, kicking the year off. That was great. It was great for us for the podcast, and we had something to talk about. It was energetic. I'm still trying to figure out why watches and tennis are so linked together, and how, unlike any other sport, it's the one sport that has a sort of a jewelry component to it, maybe outside of sailing, but I thought that was always kind of interesting. And
wait a minute, what's the jewelry component in sailing?
Well, they give out watches as
an award,
participation awards, and
got it,
swag, that kind of thing.
Sailing, I don't know about
Marblehead.
I live in a sailing town. That's really all I have. I mean, I thought that the Naomi Osaka bust was sort of, that's a bad pun. Her lack of performance coming back.
Yeah.
I thought that was, they tried to make that a huge story, and it just wasn't there. I love watching the women play almost, as much as the men, and that game is really exciting at the moment, which is a lot of fun. I wish it would get more attention and more press. To Stephanie Miles' point, it doesn't get enough attention, and it's one of the most exciting sports, male or female, out there. It doesn't matter that they're women playing. It's a phenomenal game, and I hope that more people file noise complaints against pickleball.
That would be under worst.
That's your worst?
Worst.
Constant worst.
It is. It's noise pollution.
I'll also say, to chime in, other than Lone Pines Winter Carnival going down as best beverage of 2024, I would say a very close second would be the Honeydeuce, which I had several of. And a close third would probably be Pimm's. But the beverage, these beverages are becoming a part of the Grand Slams, right? Does not the Australian Open, did they not?
They just came up
live
with
and
one.
tweeting your Honeydeuces that
Yes.
morning. Yeah.
Yes. You're correct. But no, beverages like the Honeydeuce, I think, had a good year. Best content, it was a good year for content. We've talked a lot about Netflix. I think Breakpoint on Netflix and Challengers as well were two good watches. And there'll be a lot more of that, where those shows came from. And then last thing I had for best and worst was best hire and best fire. Best hire being Joker taking on Sir Andy Murray as his coach, which I agree with Natalie. It's going to be fascinating to see, starting with the Australian Open, how that new marriage takes off. And then best fire would be Coco firing Brad Gilbert, and I couldn't think of another fire, so that's the only one. And I have an issue with Brad
That's
Gilbert.
a big deal.
It is. Agreed. I have an issue with Brad Gilbert doing commentary and coaching in the
100%.
In the morning,
distracted.
he's in her corner, wearing his gear, getting all the FaceTime, and then an hour later, he's in the booth commenting. And if I'm her, I'm like, where are you? I need you now in the locker room. I need you now at dinner. I need you now while I'm training, stretching, whatever it may be, talking, the mind game of tennis.
Yeah,
But,
at a moment's notice, and he's not always available.
yeah.
I find it also just to be a basic conflict of interest, not because I'm sure he can arrange his schedule where he can make it work, but I wouldn't want my coach to be commenting about other players. I mean, maybe it's an advantage. Maybe it's this bizarre analysis that he provides that they pick up on or something that's there's connection there in some way, shape, or form. But I've always found it to be a conflict of interest. I didn't realize until we started really paying attention with this podcast and really looking closely at the sport that he was coaching and announcing. And
I agree wholeheartedly. And of all players, Coco Gauff, who needs someone 24/7, and she is a talent that deserves a coach that's going to be all in.
Right.
She wants,
And
who her coach should be is Serena Williams.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
She might get inspired by it. She's tight with Murray and Djokovic, so maybe she'll watch that and say, that's how I can get my fix. It's a great way to get, stay close to the game without having to play.
My last best worst would be the best stat drop of the entire year after 9 episodes of Breaking Back is that tennis has the shortest quote-unquote off-season. And as someone who's worked in sports, you say off-season. Most people work even harder in the off-season. So even though there's a quote-unquote off-season, you're not sipping umbrella drinks down in the Bahamas during the quote-unquote off-season. But tennis has the shortest of all pro sports in just a mere 34 days.
Crazy.
As compared to the NHL that has 118 days off, and sports like the NFL, which has 241 days off.
I wish I had that many days off in the year. Well, my final thoughts,
34
fellas.
days off. That is just not enough time.
No, gosh, no. I mean, and they're still doing, even in this off period, they're playing these hit and giggles like in New York or Charlotte or whatever, because there's so much money to
See,
get.
that's the thing that a commissioner could establish in the sport that would make it's not just giving them more time to rest, but where you have tournaments where they pay players appearance fees just to show up. It doesn't matter if they win or lose. We just want you to come here because we know we're going to sell tickets if you show up.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's do the John McEnroe Agassi pickleball exhibition. Center court before we, whatever it is, whatever promotional activation they think of to get people to go to the tournament, if you had a commissioner, you could establish some rules about how tournaments have to put a certain percentage of their revenue back into the ATP or the WTA, which I'm sure that they probably do with license fees and things like that. But if you had it more uniformly, evenly spread out, I think you could look at the tournaments the way that you look at cities in the NFL as the markets. So these tournaments are essentially markets, and the big markets are the big four. Well, how do we get the smaller tournaments more time, more clout? Well, we spread more of the money around. How do you do that? Well, you have to have somebody direct that. And
right. Someone has to own it, essentially. Yeah. Well, I think we'll see more about that in 25. I don't think as much advance. It didn't advance as far as I thought it would this year. But, well, I'll wrap up with this, guys. My favorite moments, connecting with John Butler in that episode, talking about the changes in tennis and what he recommends. The guy's just so inspired, and he's led us down some great paths here at the podcast in our first year. I loved going down the rabbit hole for challengers, Chris. So thank you for introducing us to that movie and to the FX.
Brian Drews.
Yes, thank you to Brian. And that led me to Zendaya and Euphoria, but which we'll talk about another time.
It's another podcast.
Oh, those
it's
are
a whole another podcast.
Those are some hard hours I spent watching that show.
I chose not to.
And then tearful but timely goodbyes for Murray and Rafa. I thought, it was the time for them to go, and Murray's been fighting injuries year after year. So has Rafa, and they kept battling until the very end. So incredible. The Rafa's got a Netflix special that's dropping anytime now, so I'm looking forward to that. And then the last thing, guys, I just got to say, realizing this podcast with two great friends has been a total blast, and learned a lot, and looking forward to building on it here in 2025. So thanks, fellas.
Hear, hear.
Mazel tov.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to Breaking Back on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to follow us on X and Instagram at Breaking Back Pod.